Let us begin then, not with a conclusion, but with a question, because questions are far more interesting than answers. Who are you really, when you are not busy telling yourself who you are? When you are not rehearsing your name, your history, your anxieties, your ambitions, what remains? You may say, "Why, I am here, of course." But what is this here? And who is it that claims it? Now imagine, if you will, that you are not a thing dropped into the universe like a pebble tossed into a pond, but that you are something the universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something the ocean is doing. The wave may say, "I am separate. I begin here and end there." But the ocean smiles, because it knows better. The wave is a gesture, a dance, a temporary curl of a vast and infinite body. And you, my dear listener, are just such a gesture. We have been taught, oh, so carefully, so thoroughly, that we are isolated egos, trapped inside bags of skin, confronting a world that is foreign, hostile, or at best indifferent. This is a peculiar hallucination, useful perhaps for certain games, commerce, competition, survival, but nevertheless a hallucination. For where exactly does you end and the world begin? At your skin? But your skin is breathing. Air rushes in and out, sunlight pours into your eyes, vibrations ripple through your ears. You are not sealed off. You are open-ended. Consider this. You cannot have an inside without an outside, just as you cannot have a front without a back. The two arise together, and so the sense of being a separate self only exists because there is a world to appear separate from. They are two sides of a single coin, two poles of one happening. The universe is not something that happened once, long ago, and now sits there like a completed artifact. The universe is happening now, and you are where it is happening. When you look out at the stars and feel small, insignificant, ask yourself, who is it that is aware of those stars? The universe has grown eyes, ears, nerves, and imagination, and it calls this particular experiment you, just as it calls another experiment tree, and another cloud, and another galaxy. The difference is not one of substance, but of form. The same energy, the same patterning, playing different games. You see, the universe delights in pretending. It plays hide-and-seek with itself. It forgets who it is just for the thrill of remembering, and so it becomes people, each one convinced, at least for a while, that they are only a fragment, a lonely bit of cosmic debris. But this forgetting is part of the fun. Without it, there could be no surprise, no drama, no laughter. Now you might say, very poetic, but what does this have to do with my life? My worries, my fears, my aching sense that something is missing? Ah, but that aching is precisely the clue. It is the universe nudging itself, whispering, you are more than you think. The sense of separation is like a tight knot in the mind, and when you begin to loosen it, even slightly, you feel relief. Not because you have acquired something new, but because you have stopped pretending to be so small. And so we continue, gently, without force, without dogma, simply watching this marvelous pretense unfold, this dance in which the universe, wearing your face, wonders who on earth it could possibly be. And as we watch this pretense, this cosmic masquerade, something curious begins to dawn upon us. The problem we thought we had, the problem of being a lonely self adrift in an alien world, starts to look rather like the punchline of a joke we haven't quite caught yet. Because the harder you try to pin down this I, this central controller, the more elusive it becomes. Where is it? Is it in your head? If so, which part? Behind the eyes? Between the ears? Or is it merely a habit of thought, a kind of grammatical convenience? You see, language has played a magnificent trick on us. Because we have nouns, we assume there must be things. Because we say I think, we assume there must be a thinker separate from the thought. But when you look closely, very closely, you find thinking happening, but no thinker apart from the thinking. Just as there is seeing, but no seer separate from the sight. It's rather like expecting to find a dancer apart from the dance. Now, this can feel unsettling at first. People often say, but if there's no separate me, then who is responsible? Who chooses? Who lives my life? And the answer is both simpler and more astonishing than you might expect. Life lives you. The universe is doing you in exactly the same way it is doing the wind blowing or the heart beating. Do you beat your heart? Do you grow your hair? Or do these things simply happen? Of course, the mind protests. It says, if I let go of control, everything will fall apart. But look, everything is already falling apart, beautifully, all the time. Stream. Control, as we imagine it, is largely a polite fiction. What actually happens is spontaneous order, a self-organizing play of patterns. And you are one of those patterns. Imagine watching a cat walk across a fence. The cat doesn't calculate angles or consult a manual on balance. It simply walks. Its body knows. In the same way, you know far more about living than your anxious mind gives you credit for. When you stop interfering, stop trying to stand outside yourself and manage life like a bureaucrat with a clipboard, there is a profound sense of ease. Not passivity, mind you, but effortless action. Doing without a doer. This is why the idea that you are the universe pretending to be separate is not merely a metaphysical curiosity. It has practical consequences of the most intimate kind. When you truly feel, rather than merely think, that the world is not out to get you, that it is not something you must conquer or defend yourself against, an immense relaxation occurs. You begin to trust the process, not blindly, not foolishly, but deeply. Fear, after all, is largely born from the illusion of isolation. If you believe you are a fragile little ego surrounded by an overwhelming and indifferent cosmos, then of course you will be anxious. Of course you will clutch, compete, and compare. But if you realize that the cosmos is not indifferent, it is you in a very elaborate disguise, then fear begins to lose its footing. You may still feel pain. You may still experience loss. But beneath it all, there is a sense of being fundamentally at home. And what a curious home it is. A place where everything changes, where nothing can be held, where even your own thoughts slip through your fingers. Yet it is precisely this impermanence that makes the dance possible. If the universe did not let go of its forms, it could never create new ones. If you did not forget who you are, you could never rediscover it with delight. So the game continues. The universe goes on pretending to be worried, pretending to be ambitious, pretending to be confused. And every so often, in moments of laughter, silence, or sudden clarity, it peeks out from behind the mask and says, "Ah, yes, this too." And then, with a twinkle, it dives back into the role, because after all, the show is far too interesting to stop now. And so you see, awakening, if we must use such a grand and overworked word, is not a matter of becoming something extraordinary. It is the realization that you never were anything else. It is not a heroic ascent to a mountaintop where angels applaud. It is a quiet chuckle, a soft, "Oh, I see," like suddenly recognizing your own reflection in a shop window you've passed 1,000 times. Because what kept you asleep was not darkness, but preoccupation. You were too busy trying to improve the wave to notice the ocean, too busy asking, "What should I do with my life?" instead of wondering, "Who is it that is living?" And once that question is honestly entertained, not answered, mind you, but entertained, the whole structure of your worries begins to wobble. Take, for example, the relentless urge to become somebody, to be important, successful, admired, remembered. This urge is rooted in the fear of vanishing. But how can the universe vanish? Forms disappear, yes. Masks are set down. Roles conclude. But the energy that plays them does not go anywhere. When you understand this, not as a belief, but as a felt intuition, you can afford to be ordinary. You can afford to fail. You can afford to be exactly what you are, because what you are is not at risk. This does not mean you suddenly become inert, indifferent, or bland. quite the opposite. When you stop trying to justify your existence, life becomes playful. You act not to secure your being, but to express it. A bird does not sing to prove it exists. It sings because singing is what happens when bird and morning meet. And in the same way, when you in this moment meet, something happens. That something is your life. Now notice how strange our usual way of thinking is. We imagine that consciousness is trapped inside our heads, peering out at a separate world through little windows called eyes. But what if it's the other way around? What if your eyes are not windows you look out of, but apertures the universe looks into itself? What if consciousness is not in you, but you are in consciousness, like a whirlpool in a river, a local eddy in an endless flow? If that is so, then death takes on a very different complexion. Instead of being a catastrophic annihilation, it is more like the end of a sentence, the closing of a musical phrase. Necessary, natural, even elegant. The universe does not lose anything when a wave subsides. It simply reshapes itself. And this understanding, when allowed to sink in, does not make you morbid. It makes you appreciative. Every moment becomes precious precisely because it cannot be repeated. You may begin to notice, too, that the line between your experience and the world's activity is astonishingly thin. Your thoughts arise uninvited. Your emotions surge and fade without consulting a committee. Even your decisions often announce themselves after the fact, like a narrator catching up with a story already in motion, and instead of being alarming, this can be deeply reassuring. You are not a lonely general commanding an unruly army. You are a happening unfolding exactly as it must. From this perspective, compassion becomes natural rather than virtuous. When you see others as fundamentally separate, kindness feels like a moral obligation, something you ought to do. But when you recognize that others are the universe in different costumes, compassion is simply good manners. You don't injure your left hand to benefit your right. You don't hoard your breath from your lungs. You act with care because it makes sense. And so, gradually, without any dramatic conversion, the sense of being a stranger in the world begins to dissolve. You start to feel in your bones that you belong, not because you were granted permission, but because you were never absent to begin with. The universe has always been right where you are, and it always will be, wearing whatever form is necessary to keep the dance going, the music playing, and the mystery deliciously alive. Now, if you truly let this sink in, really let it seep past the intellect and into the gut, you may notice a subtle but radical shift in how you approach your everyday life. The morning light through the window is no longer just out there. The sound of traffic, the taste of tea, the ache in your shoulders, they are not interruptions to life. They are life. The universe is not waiting for you at the end of your spiritual journey. It is brushing its teeth as you brush yours. It is breathing as you breathe. It is pretending, quite convincingly, to be utterly mundane. And this is where many people become confused. They imagine that realizing one is the universe means floating above the world in a permanent state of bliss, untouched by sorrow or confusion. But that would be a dreadful misunderstanding. The universe does not transcend its own messiness. It revels in it. To be the universe is to feel joy and grief, clarity and doubt, love and loss. The awakening is not an escape from the human condition. It is an embrace of it, without the extra burden of believing it is all happening to a poor, isolated me. You still get angry. You still feel afraid. You still make mistakes. But something important changes. You stop taking these movements so personally. They are weather patterns, not moral failures. Thunderstorms do not apologize for being loud. Autumn does not feel guilty for shedding leaves. And you need not be ashamed for being exactly as alive as you are. In fact, much of our suffering comes from resisting what we already are. We tense against our thoughts, argue with our emotions, condemn ourselves for not being more enlightened, more peaceful, more whatever we imagine we should be. But this resistance is simply the universe tying itself in knots, pretending it has made a mistake. And there are no mistakes, only experiments. So what, then, is the practical art of living with this understanding? It is astonishingly simple and therefore easily overlooked. It is the art of listening. Listening to your body. Listening to the moment. Listening without immediately trying to correct, improve, or explain. When you listen in this way, action arises naturally, like a response rather than a reaction. You don't force yourself to be present. Presence happens when you stop trying to be elsewhere. You may notice that time itself begins to feel different. The past loosens its grip. The future loses its tyrannical pull. Not because you deny them, but because you see them for what they are. Ideas happening now. Memories are current events. Expectations are present fantasies. And the only place anything ever actually occurs is here. This does not make you careless. It makes you attentive, and in this attentiveness, something delightfully paradoxical appears. The less you try to define yourself, the more vividly you exist. The more you let go of the story of who you are supposed to be, the more responsive, creative, and alive you become. Identity, you see, is a useful mask, but it suffocates when you forget it is a mask. This is why playfulness is such an important clue. Children understand this instinctively. They slip in and out of roles with ease, becoming pirates, dragons, teachers, monsters, utterly absorbed yet never truly lost. The tragedy of adulthood is not responsibility. It is the loss of play. We forget that we are acting. We cling to the role as if our lives depended on it. But the universe is always at play, and it invites you to join. Not by becoming frivolous, but by becoming fluid. And so, when you encounter difficulty, and you will, you can meet it differently. Not as an assault on your identity, but as a movement within the whole. Even confusion has its place. Even despair has its depth. They are not signs that you are failing at being the universe. They are ways the universe explores itself. To live this way is not to float above the world, but to sink into it completely. To feel the ground under your feet, the breath in your lungs, the vastness behind your thoughts. And in that sinking, that yielding, you may discover the most surprising thing of all. There was never any need to hold yourself together. The universe has been doing that all along, and when you finally stop trying to hold yourself together, something extraordinarily gentle occurs. You begin to trust falling apart. You see that disintegration is not the opposite of life, but one of its favorite tricks. Every exhalation is a small surrender. Every night's sleep is a rehearsal for letting go. And yet you wake up. Not because you clung on, but because the whole process knows how to continue without your supervision. This is why the urge to secure yourself, to be certain, to be right, to be safe, creates so much tension. Certainty is an attempt to freeze a river. Safety is an attempt to nail the clouds to the sky. But you are not meant to be fixed. You are meant to move. And movement, by its very nature, feels uncertain when you insist on standing still. Notice how often the mind asks, "What's the point of all this?" As if existence were a task assigned by an external authority. But the universe has no boss. It is not trying to get anywhere. It is dancing. And the point of a dance is not to arrive at a particular spot on the floor. The point is the dancing itself. When you see this, the demand that life justify itself simply evaporates. You don't need a cosmic resume. You don't need to earn your place. You are already in. You always have been. The very fact that you are experiencing anything at all, confusion, delight, boredom, wonder, is proof enough that the universe has invited you into the game. And what a strange and marvelous game it is, where the rules keep changing, and forgetting the rules is part of the fun. At this stage, people sometimes worry, if I stop taking myself so seriously, won't I become irresponsible? But look carefully. Seriousness is not the same thing as sincerity. You can care deeply without being grim. You can act responsibly without imagining yourself to be a separate little commander fighting chaos. In fact, when you drop that fantasy, your actions tend to become more appropriate, not less, because they are less tangled in fear. Think of a skilled musician improvising. They are not anxiously planning every note in advance. They are listening, responding, allowing the music to move through them. And precisely because of this openness, the music is alive. Your life can be like that, an improvisation rather than a script you must rigidly follow. This also sheds light on love. When you believe you are separate, love becomes a transaction or a strategy. I will give you this if you give me that. But when you see that the other is not fundamentally other, love becomes recognition. You are delighted by another person in the same way the left hand might be delighted by the right. Different, yes, but not alien. Love, then, is not something you fall into or out of. It is the natural resonance of the whole with itself. And even conflict begins to look different. Disagreement, tension, contrast. These are not failures of unity. They are expressions of it. Just as the universe contains both mountains and valleys, silence and sound, so it contains opposing viewpoints, clashing desires, unresolved questions. Harmony is not uniformity. Harmony is the fitting together of differences, so you need not rush to resolve everything. You need not force closure. Life is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be lived. And mysteries, by their nature, cannot be exhausted. The moment you think you have finally understood it all, the universe changes the tune and invites you to listen again. And perhaps the most liberating realization of all is this: you are allowed to be exactly where you are, enlightened or confused, peaceful or restless, confident or uncertain. It is all part of the same unfolding. The universe does not scold itself for exploring a darker mood. It does not rush itself through winter. It trusts the cycle. So sit, stand, walk, breathe, however this moment finds you, and notice that you are not watching life from the already moving. The seeker and the sought collapse into a single luminous happening. This is why silence becomes so eloquent. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence that remains when there is nothing left to defend. In that silence, you do not disappear. On the contrary, you become intimate with everything. The hum of existence reveals itself as your own voice, speaking in 1,000 dialects, wind in the trees, blood in the veins, laughter in a crowded room, the quiet ache of longing. And longing, too, finds its place. You see, the universe enjoys desire. It stretches itself into wanting, just as it stretches itself into form. Desire is not a mistake. It is emotion. Trouble only arises when desire imagines itself to be incomplete. But desire is not a whole. It is a current. It moves because movement is what energy does. So you need not abolish desire. You need not purify yourself of passion, curiosity, or ambition. You only need to see through the illusion that these movements are happening to a separate someone who must somehow manage them correctly. When that illusion dissolves, desire becomes creative rather than compulsive. It flows instead of grips. And then there is the simplest, strangest freedom of all, the freedom to be natural, to laugh when laughter arises, to weep when tears come, to speak when words form, and to remain silent when they do not. Not as a rule, not as a discipline, but as a responsiveness. Like water taking the shape of the cup, not because it is obedient, but because that is its nature. At this point, you may notice that life has not become easier in the way the ego once hoped, but it has become lighter. The weight of self-importance has been set down. The burden of needing to be someone special, someone finished, someone secure, gone. What remains is participation. Full, intimate participation in a world that is no longer out there, but right here, breathing with you. And perhaps the most tender realization is this: you were never lost. All those years of searching, striving, doubting, hoping, they were not detours. They were the path itself. The universe was not waiting impatiently for you to wake up. It was enjoying the dream. Every twist of confusion, every moment of forgetting was part of the story it was telling itself through you. So there is nothing to fix, nothing to force, nothing to hurry. This moment does not need to be improved before it can be accepted. It is already complete, precisely because it is incomplete. It is alive, and now as you listen to these words, notice that they too are simply sounds arising and fading. They do not demand belief. They do not ask for allegiance. They point gently back to what you cannot escape anyway. The fact of being here. The miracle of experiencing anything at all. You are not a fragment of the universe struggling to reconnect with the whole. You are the whole doing what the whole does, appearing as fragments, playing at being many, delighting in contrast and surprise. And when you forget this again, and you will, that too is part of the play. The forgetting makes the remembering sweet. So rest, if only for a moment, in the knowledge that there is nowhere else to be, nothing else to become. The universe is not going anywhere. It is right here, pretending to be you, listening to itself speak, and smiling, quietly, endlessly, at the wonder of it all.